Are you or a loved one suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder after a motor vehicle accident? If yes, I'm going to help you today. I'm going to talk you through the most effective treatments, and there are effective treatments for PTSD after car accidents. And I also want to let you know that you or your loved one are not alone, are not strange. Unfortunately, there has been research that has shown that over 30% of motor vehicle accident survivors develop post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, which is an enormous percentage. So I will talk you through this. If you're new to my channel, my name is Barbara Heffernan, and I am a specialist in anxiety and trauma. I'm also a Buddhist and a mindfulness meditation instructor, and I created this YouTube channel to help bring more information and more joy into people's lives. So if you support what I'm doing here, I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe to my channel and give me a thumbs up on this video if you like it, and make a comment below, say hello, let me know what you thought, let me know if you have any questions. Today I'm going to cover three things. One, the symptoms that you might be having if you had a car accident and are developing PTSD symptoms. Two, what makes it more likely and less likely that you will develop post-traumatic stress disorder. And then three, what the treatment options are that can help you recover, and you can recover. So common symptoms after a car accident can include nightmares, distressing thoughts, recurring thoughts about the accident, flashbacks, full-on flashbacks, feeling like you are smelling or hearing what happened during the car accident. And all of those fall into the PTSD category of intrusive symptoms. You also might find it really hard to get back in a car. You might really not want to drive. You may not even want to be a passenger. And you may definitely not want to drive in the area where the accident happened. And all of that would fall into avoidance symptoms. And I do have some other videos on this topic that would be worthwhile watching. One of them is called PTSD Avoidance Symptoms. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how avoidance symptoms can actually make PTSD worse, but we'll come back to that. So you have your intrusive symptoms, you have your avoidance symptoms, and then there are also hyperarousal symptoms. You might feel constantly on edge. You might have difficulty sleeping. Your startle response may have gotten very, very strong. You might just feel anxious all the time. You might develop psychosomatic physical symptoms that tie with anxiety, like stomach aches, headaches. Sometimes people develop panic attacks after car accidents, unfortunately, where their heart races. They might feel like they're having a heart attack, but they're not, but they just feel like their panic is out of control. And then the last grouping of post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms are in the negative cognitions. You might develop some negative thoughts about yourself or the world in terms of, that was my fault, I was stupid, I never should have done that. There might be negative thoughts about the other driver, and overall negative thoughts about the safety and your safety. And those thoughts and those cognitions can go around and around, and they can make all of the other symptoms worse. So there are aspects to a car accident that might make it more likely that you would develop post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. And I would put those into the category of powerlessness, a feeling of not having any agency. When people have described this to me, it's often been a feeling that they knew the accident was happening and they just kind of have to let go of the wheel and wait. So it's almost like there's a freeze mode that happens. Or if the freeze mode happens after the accident or somebody is trapped. But that freeze mode, that powerless mode, really in all kinds of trauma can make traumatic response more difficult and the symptoms worse. So that would be one thing. Another thing obviously would be tied to the fatalities in the accident and the severity of the accident. But sometimes it's not even necessarily a horrible accident. It just might be one in which you felt that you or someone else was likely to die. And that terror and that panic can create a traumatic response to the incident, and then traumatic responses that continue to happen after the car accident is over. And then after the accident, there are things that might make post-traumatic symptoms worse, and there are things that might make them better. The things that would help a person not develop post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms afterward would be a quick response on the part of emergency personnel and understanding response from their support network. The quicker that the person's physiological arousal can be calmed down, the quicker that they can be moved to a feeling of safety, the less post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms they are likely to have. The quicker the person is able to start driving again, probably the lower the post-traumatic stress response will be as well. So avoiding driving, unfortunately, makes all of these symptoms much, much worse. And then there are a number of things that can make PTSD symptoms worse after the accident. One is not getting treatment. The sooner you get treatment, the quicker you'll get better. Absolutely. Two is self-medicating with alcohol or biphasic drugs. Biphasic drugs being anything where you get an initial release when you take the drug, and then after the half-life of the drug is finished in your body, you are left more anxious than you were before. Blaming self, if you or your loved one is blaming yourself for the accident, that can also exacerbate symptoms. And then finally, obviously, if there are fatalities in the accidents, it's going to be much harder to recover. It still is possible, but it will be harder. And if there is a grief response happening, then that can actually mask some of the post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. So please look out for that and watch out for that and be clear that you can be both grieving and having post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. One of the most effective treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder after a car accident is EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And I have a number of videos on EMDR. I can link them here. And there is a lot of research demonstrating the effectiveness. In fact, there is an article on the National Institute of Health website about neuroimaging studies of the brain after car accidents and the effectiveness of EMDR, and they can actually see the changes in the brain from both the accident and the post-traumatic stress disorder, and then from the EMDR treatment. Other effective therapy treatments include cognitive behavioral therapy and exposure therapy. And with all three of these treatments, at some point, you will need to start driving again to recover fully from the post-traumatic stress disorder. And obviously, it's also very helpful to be driving fully if you want to return to full functioning. But I also understand that for many car accident survivors, that thought is like way out of their mind. So hopefully the therapist that you work with will first begin to give you tools to physiologically relax, to calm yourself, and ways to regulate your emotion so that when you do get into a car, you're able to calm down your emotional brain that is sort of on fire with PTSD symptoms. And the more you can calm down and be in a car at the same time, the quicker your recovery process will be. So the last piece about recovery that I'd like to address are medications that are sometimes used in conjunction with treatment. But before I do that, I want to let you know that I do have a free mini course, which is basically 3 guided visualizations that I do with my clients in the office in person to guide them through methods to physiologically relax. It would be something that you could start immediately, that you could begin to use some of these tools and practice on your own. Those physiological relaxation tools, they really help with the hyperarousal symptoms, which will then help with the whole thing. So medications. One medication that's sometimes prescribed is a beta blocker, and beta blockers are not addictive. They do lower your blood pressure, help you feel a little bit more relaxed. They help with hyperarousal symptoms, and they sometimes can help with flashbacks and intrusive thoughts as well. Another thing that is often prescribed are SSRIs, antidepressants. And while they're an antidepressant, they also help with some types of anxiety, and they can sometimes be helpful for somebody who has post-traumatic stress disorder. And then the last medication that I've seen that can sometimes be helpful for people if they are having a lot of flashbacks, a lot of nightmares, difficulty sleeping, is an antipsychotic in a very, very low dose. Now, I need to add a caveat here because I am not a doctor. I did not go to medical school, so I do not prescribe medications. And I do think that most people, or many, many people, can recover from post-traumatic stress disorder without any medication at all. But sometimes, depending on the person, depending on the situation, it does seem to really help treatment. So this would be something to talk about with your therapist and with your medical doctor or psychiatrist, and to see what might work for you. And the one thing I would really like to caution against is the taking of benzodiazepines. Now, benzodiazepines are things like Xanax, Valium. They are very, very frequently prescribed by physicians for situations like this. And in my view, they really impede treatment for a number of reasons. Benzodiazepines are biphasic drugs, which means that when you take it, it's flooding your body with your own feel-good chemicals all at once. And then once you hit the half-life of the medication, your body is left with fewer of those chemicals than it would have had to begin with. So after the half-life of the drug, you are more anxious than you were to begin with. That is what makes these medications addictive. And then the medications also teach people that the answer is outside of themselves. So instead of the person developing the agency of, I can learn to regulate my own emotions, I can learn to recover from this, the person becomes dependent on an external substance. Now, this is a very controversial subject, and there will be people who don't agree with me, but there is also a lot of research that also supports this. And the World Health Organization actually comes right out and states that it does not recommend the use of benzodiazepines for post-traumatic stress disorder of any kind. And there is also research showing that benzodiazepines can actually impede the processing portion of EMDR treatment in particular. So there is definitely research behind what I'm saying. And in my personal experience, I find this to be a very large problem for people because they might end up taking the benzodiazepines for a very long period of time. Now, I want to read you this piece from an article I found in the American Family Physician on post-traumatic stress disorder after car accidents, and it's talking about the medications that people can prescribe. And while it lists benzodiazepines as possibly helpful, it says, caution should be used with benzodiazepine therapy because of the possibility of short-term memory loss, which may already be compromised as a result of the dissociation that occurs in post-traumatic stress disorder. Patients may also experience rebound anxiety after the medications are stopped. In my opinion, they can experience rebound anxiety after the half-life of the drug has moved through their system. And the article also says to avoid chronic daily use of the benzodiazepines, and it suggests some alternate treatments. So my biggest recommendation for somebody who has post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms after a car accident is that they get therapy. And I do have a video called How to Find an EMDR Therapist, and it's also very useful for finding other therapists as well. And I also work with a very small number of people via video therapy, and I do some EMDR online, so that would also be an option. If you wanted to book a free consult with me, there's a link in the notes to this video. You can do that as well. And there are other online options now for therapy. So if you're feeling unable to get out and drive to get to therapy, there are some online options that can help you. And then eventually you'll need to work with that therapist on a behavioral plan to begin driving again. So I hope this video was helpful for you. Please do subscribe to my channel. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it and give me a comment below. Till the next time.